In a recent episode of your podcast, which I listened to just a week ago, Neil Oliver's Love Letter to the World, by the way, excellent podcast. Go and subscribe to that right now. You spoke about Europe, I think you said, dying from 1,000 self-inflicted cuts in the context of mass migration. We've had more boat migrants arriving on British shores this year than in the whole of last year. We're now paying £7 million a day. It's gone up from 5 to put them up in taxpayer-funded free hotels. Many of them aren't even being vetted now when they arrive. They're not even being rescued by the border force, some of them when they arrive. And in the recent case, 80 of them ran off into the nearest town. One of them broke into a woman's house. You've got people in those coastal towns now arming themselves with hammers and weapons because they fear being home invaded by these individuals. Of course, we know the vast majority aren't refugees. There are genuine refugees, but this is not them. The vast majority are economic migrants, 4 out of 10 coming from Albania, not a country at war. When we look back historically, Neil, do we have any comparable examples of what happens to nations when they become subsumed by such large waves of foreign peoples in such a short period of time? Or is what we're experiencing now and have over the past 10 years or so unprecedented in history?
I think in the main it's unprecedented in history. I think, obviously what happened in Germany when Angela Merkel just said, come one, come all, and, 1 million people arrived. And what is obviously happening in Sweden, for example, I spoke about it on GB News not that long ago. There's hundreds of explosions. Homemade explosives are being deployed in certain ghettoized no-go zones in the suburbs of Swedish cities, and people are very, very, very vexed. I mean, that's one of the most, let's say, progressive, left-leaning, social democracy civilizations on the face of the earth, and they're at breaking point with it. They've reached the point where they're having to say, we can't handle this because of the sheer number of the percentage of people now living in Sweden who aren't born in Sweden and have come in recent years. So I think what's happening is unprecedented. I think to some extent it's almost unavoidable that people are on the move. I remember reading about it when I needed to a couple of years ago, and the UN at the time was saying that there were 1 billion people on the move in the world, 1 in 8. A lot of that was movement within countries, but also people moving across borders. I think what's happening at the moment with this end of accessible energy and the damage that's happening to the availability of food, that you're going to get this horrendous coming together at the same time of no access to energy and trouble getting hold of food. That, as anybody with even the vaguest sense of history knows, is going to be catastrophic for the poorest countries in the world, in Africa and elsewhere. I've seen horrendous predictions about, in the next a year to 18 months, hundreds of millions of people dying. And I've even seen people speculating about the loss of a billion, in the next 18 months to 2 years. I'm not predicting that. I'm just, relaying anecdotally the kind of some of the stuff that I've been reading. And so, tens of millions of people in the poorest countries will have no option but to move. If they can't eat and they can't provide for themselves or their families, what else are they going to do? So if you think there's a lot of people on the move through Europe at the moment, I think the next year or so is going to see even more. So I do think it's unprecedented, and the number of people that are trying to get across the channel, if you think it's a lot at the moment, that's only going to get more. But you're right, it's that what we're seeing at the moment is economic migrants and these characters coming in from Albania, who are apparently the get out of jail free card is to say you've been trafficked, and at that point, legal legislation kicks in to mean that you can't be touched, you can't be removed. You're good to go then if you say that you've been trafficked. And everyone can see with their own eyes that the vast majority of the people coming off the boats are just young guys. They're not fleet. You're not a refugee from war if you're coming from France. You may at some stage in the process have come away from a war-torn country, but you can't claim that when you're leaving France. Why aren't you claiming all that? That's all of that stuff's well rehearsed. But yes, we're being the British people are being taken for a ride. There's so many people struggling to heat, struggling to eat, and over the next months it's going to be dire, and they're having to look on at 1,000 people a day coming in who, past experience suggests will all be accommodated free of charge in good accommodation, hotels, houses, moved into council houses, fed, watered, given money, and that is, the British people are being taken for a ride. As you rightly point out, I'm sure within it there are people, refugees. There are always refugees on the move. Of course there are. But what's unfolding at Manston, that asylum seeker processing centre in Kent, that's just symptomatic of too many people. That's because the system that's in place can't cope, and that situation is only going to get worse, without a doubt. And the tax-paying, hard-working, law-abiding people of Britain are just being played for mugs at the moment. I even wonder. You have to wonder if there's even the will. Is there the will to stop it? Because all of us have got the same solutions about not making the place attractive. Everyone says the same things. Why don't you just say, if you come via these illegal routes, you will never get residency? And why aren't we saying, if you come by these illegal routes, why are we making the reception so desirable? Who wouldn't come in search of the things that are on offer here? But I think it's unprecedented. I mean, if you look back in history, the mass migration, I suppose you say, into North America in the as once the old world discovered the new world, and Europe discovered North America, and people moved in their thousands, the poor huddled masses, made for America, and that didn't play out very well for the indigenous populations of North America. Likewise, but it's back into other worlds and other times. The Spanish and the Portuguese that made contact with the populations in Central and South America, and that was catastrophic. Warfare, disease in the main, wiping out 90% of the indigenous populations in some of these places. The Spanish also imported encomienda, which was a kind of a land management system that they had brought from the place of the Reconquista, where the Spanish had driven the Moorish Muslim populations out. They had gained the upper hand there, and the people on the ground, rich people, landowners, were given control over the poor people in territories, and it was like a kind of an obligation to provide labour for your master. So there was a kind of slavery in all but name, and they took that with them to South America, and they imparted that encomienda system into the territories that they conquered in South America, and the local people were enslaved in all but name. They owed the boss, the owner of the land, who'd been suddenly given the land. The local population owed the sweat of their brows and the strength of their backs to this person, and it was catastrophic. But that was a different kind of migration, and that was a colonization, and it's different, and it's these things aren't properly analogous. In answer to your question, what's happening in Europe, and Douglas Murray obviously has written about the strange death of Europe, and what's happening in Britain. I mean, what is it? Are we bringing in 1 million new people a year? Is that right? So it's like a reasonable sized city's worth of new people are coming into Britain now on an annual basis. Is that right? Correct me if I'm wrong. I think it's something like that.
Yeah, and then if you take the ones that are leaving, generally over the last 10, 15 years, you've seen, I think, net 300,000 people added to the population every year, which is the size of a medium city.
Yeah.
That actually got worse under the Conservatives. The It was about 50,000 on average, I think, before the Blair government got in kind of the early 90s. After the Blair government got in, it shot up to about 200,000. Then under the Tories, who were supposed to control it, it's 300,000. And again, that leads to pressures on the NHS, house building at record levels.
It's impossible. You know, there's people here, obviously, the people already here can't afford housing.
Yeah.
There's pressure on all the systems, NHS, you know, getting a doctor's appointment, getting a dentist, getting your kids into school, you know, just a local state school. All these things are problematic already for people, and yet, you know, the tap is just wide open. It feels like bringing other people in, and the systems don't exist to cope with it. And to add insult to injury, the systems that are there. It's the economic migrants' well-being and welfare and needs that are being prioritised above everyone else's, and that's where you look on at it and you think, is there the will? Is there the will to stop this, or is this just the way it's supposed to be? I don't know.